Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Everstage's Go to Masters show. We converse with RevOps and GTM leaders from some of the most successful companies today and learn from their unique stories. Joining us today is Jordan Rogers, founding partner at the GTM Advisor Group. Jordan, thanks for joining us, and would love to get to know a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on the show today. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess the best way to describe myself is a recovering analyst who realized really early on in his career that you can't actually make dashboards out of no data, which is kind of how I fell into operations. So yeah, didn't set out to be in RevOps, didn't set out to be in operations, was much more on the analytics side and kind of fell into the opportunity to join on the operations side and fell in love with it. So that's kind of been a little bit of my early career and stayed on the operations side for now 10 plus years, building out and scaling different RevOps functions across sales, customer success, and marketing for, yeah, unicorn companies, private equity companies, a bunch of different types of companies. But yeah, on the personal side, dad of three kids. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, so love the outdoors, love skiing. Got our first snow, so we're really excited about that. But yeah, definitely just happy to be here.
Awesome. Like, it's great to have you as well. And yeah, love Utah. Was just there a couple months ago for one of our events and yeah, had a great time there. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I almost came to that event actually, but unfortunately, I was out of town when you guys were in town.
Okay.
So yeah,
Okay. Got it. Got it. Awesome. And so this was at Thumbtack, right? Where you started, you scaled the sales organization from somewhere around 4 5 reps to almost 90 reps, and you effectively built the whole RevOps function. And yeah, just curious to know that, like, what's probably the most underrated lesson from scaling massively in that 4 to 90 range, and what are those lessons that you still hold on to and rely on right now that you're in a more of a fractional operator role?
yeah. So I mean, it's a great question. Definitely saw some rapid growth at Thumbtack, and that's kind of where that transition for me happened. I was originally hired to kind of come in and be a sales analyst. Thumbtack is one of those PLG companies where they had been kind of primarily getting every new professional to sign up on the platform just natively, like from ads and other things, just no sales rep involvement at all. They had kind of done 4 sales reps to test to see could we actually make this a faster and smoother process. And then asked me to come in and kind of do some of the analysis to see if that actually was working. What I ended up finding was that all the different reps were doing different things. I still remember one of the reps was actually even using sticky notes on his desk to track his opportunities. And so, as an analyst, I think that's really where my philosophy came in, right? Of like, okay, there's no data to analyze here. Like, literally, like the data exists on sticky notes on the table. So, like, there's nothing that I can do here. And so, it really, I think, I would say that's where one of my really core foundational principles really started to come into place is that really process is way more important than technology. And I don't want to say is like you can't necessarily replace technology completely, but if you don't have a consistent process that everybody is following, then you're not going to have good data on the back end, and that means that everything downstream is going to be either made up or wrong. So think anything like your pipeline analysis or anything like forecasting or anything related to analytics at all, if you don't have a good, consistent process that people are following, then it's never actually going to result in a good outcome. And it doesn't matter if that bad process is on Salesforce, on HubSpot, on a sticky note on your desk. It doesn't matter if there's not a consistent process going on. So I'd say like that's maybe one of the big lessons that I learned. I'd say maybe a second one that I learned as well is that the why really matters when it comes to RevOps. And really that scales across a bunch of different functions. Like first for sales reps, um, the first question I feel like we always get in RevOps is why are you having me do this? Why are you making me track this field? Or why this? Why that? Um, and really, I think you as a RevOps leader, you really need to be able to help explain that it for different audiences of the why. For sales reps, the thing that they care the most about is how is this helping me get my deal done faster? How am I going to sell faster because of this thing that you're asking me to do? And so if you can articulate that why to them and you can actually show them, if you do this, then you're going to sell better, then they're going to do that every time. And you don't have to worry about it after that. But if you can't articulate that for them, then they're probably not going to do it, or they're going to do it inconsistently. And so that why really, really matters, especially when it comes to sales reps. Um, and then, yeah, I think like that the result of kind of both of those different things is that really the golden rule is data is just a byproduct of good process. Um, and if you have good process and you can really explain the why, then you're going to have good data, which means that all of your dashboards and all of your anything else that the board cares about, anything else that the executive team cares about, any of the dashboards that you care to build are actually going to mean something. And if you haven't built on that solid foundation, then kind of everything that you try to build on top of it falls apart.
Perfect. I think that's pretty well summed up, right? And I think you touched upon a few important levers within DevOps, such as we talked about process, we talked about how the tools are probably much more later on, and it's not really the first core thing that decides how a function gets built or how RevOps gets built, right? And we talked a little bit about the people that RevOps works with, sales reps, and other go to market functions. One thing that I probably want to touch up a little further from your point of view was before I'm pretty sure we're going to get a lot more into the tool side of things and the systems that you managed, built, consolidated, and so on. But before we get into the tool side of things, let's probably brush up a little bit more about the people side of things, right? So when you scale from like 4 to 90, and that's going to mean a lot of things. For example, given that Everstage in itself it's like a sales comp software, we've seen companies rapidly facing challenges when companies scale beyond 20 reps or 30 reps. So if we take something as simple as compensation, which is also process, tool, and people reliant, how has your experience been scaling something as specific like that within an organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on a really important factor as well of like documentation in general is defensibility. I would say one thing that I learned really early on from scaling the team so quickly is that you run into a lot of firsts, right? Like the first time a sales rep leaves the company, what are we going to do with their open opportunities? Or like you're talking about compensation, like maybe a new product comes in the line. How are we going to add that into the compensation plan? I think like the natural inclination in those instances, especially like those like very quick, high paced instances, are like, let's just get this done quickly. I think I learned really early on that that actually ends up hurting you later. And that in those instances, slowing down a little bit, I'm not saying like take months and months to figure this out. Like, obviously, you don't have that time, but taking the time to actually do the documentation to say, this is what we did and why becomes and pays dividends later on when you're trying to remember, hey, why did we add this to the comp plan? Or why did we set this process up in this way? Or why, like those questions inevitably will come later. And if you've just documented the why and like taken the 10 to 15 minutes needed to document it, then you're going to save yourself hours later down the road. And sometimes that's really hard. I struggle with that all the time. I always say that's a future Jordan problem. That's not a current Jordan problem. But you need to care about your future self and your future team more than your current maybe extra 15 minutes in the office to get that done. But yeah, I mean, I would say like especially related to like compensation or other components as well. I think it's really also easy to overcomplicate things. And like there's always going to be exceptions to the rules. And I think you really need to like work with your cross-functional partners, your sales leaders or your executive team to understand which of those kind of, I would say, out of the box things are going to become normal that you need to actually work into your compensation plan, or which of them are actually things that are really just a one time thing. And then I think if it is really just a one time thing, you should take a step back and ask, should we even be doing this? And I would say most of the time the answer is probably no, you shouldn't be doing that one off thing. It's going to cause lots of complication again for your future self. But if you do end up doing it, I think like keeping it out of your core, maybe compensation documentation. Like I've literally gone into companies and I've seen their comp plans be 15, 20 pages long, and sales reps don't even understand their own comp plan. And like I kind of come in and say the whole point of a comp plan for a sales rep is to incentivize them to sell. And if they don't understand how they're getting paid, then there is no incentivization for them. There's no incentive. Like they don't understand it. And so I think you just have to really avoid that complication. And like the true test, from my opinion, is if you took a brand new sales rep who you hired yesterday, could you explain the comp plan to them in under 10 minutes and have them understand it? And if the answer to that is no, then you've gone too complicated. And I think just really thinking about all of your systems and all of your different components of RevOps with that philosophy in mind, I think that really helps ground yourself on, are we overcomplicating things? Because the reality is, if you are, then you get back to that first problem that I said, right? Like the process is not going to get followed. People aren't going to understand the process. People aren't going to respond well to the different things. And so it really comes down to, how do you keep things simple, but also allow for some of the complexity of the business to learn to stay.
I think that's a perfect approach, right? And also it goes back to the first point you said about having to ask the why and having to ask it repeatedly until you make sense of the whole thing. And like you said, probably handle certain one-off exceptions the way they are exceptions, right? But then when it's recurring and when it's going to become scalable or repeated problem that comes across, you just document it, make sure that you're prepared for it to have a better RevOps function as you scale, right? So I think that was very beautifully summarized. And uh, let's probably double click on the tool side of things first. And you've rebuilt a lot of complex systems. You've restructured Salesforce. You've walked into businesses where they were using multiple CRMs, and you've consolidated them into one single system of record. And um, so the question is, when you step into such an environment which has historical chaos, if I may call it that, what's usually your process for diagnosing the whole, like setup, and figuring out what you have to keep, what you have to remove, and what you have to fix? How do you decide that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good one. I like. I mean, as I've thought about this a little bit, I think I call it the scream test a little bit of like, if we were to change this, or like, I mean, so it could be as small as if we remove this field from Salesforce or HubSpot, or if we take this CRM out completely, who's going to scream, right? Like, so it's the scream test. And uh, if the answer, like, I think you have to really stop and think, who is going to scream? and and then you have to make some decisions on, okay, can we appease those people who are going to scream by like showing them like, hey, we're actually moving out of Microsoft Dynamics into Salesforce, and this is why. Like, again, getting back to the why, helping them understand why that's going to be better for them. Great. um, Sometimes it's going to be, hey, it's actually like, maybe it's the board that's going to scream because this one field powers a report that they love, even though you can show them like, not, this report is totally bogus because none of the sales reps follow the process. Like, and if that's the case, like, then how do you go to the board and explain to them like, hey, I know how much you love this report, but it's actually not good data. Like, so you're just getting really crappy data anyways. So it's really that scream test. Who's going to scream? And honestly, like the reality that I have found is that most of the time, the answer is nobody. And when the answer is nobody, then like that is your telltale sign that you should do whatever it is that you're thinking about doing. Like a great example of this is, any Salesforce user probably have had this experience before with duplicate accounts or duplicate contacts. And Salesforce has the little bar across the top of the screen that most organizations have enabled that says like potential duplicate, and it'll show you that potential duplicate. I was at an organization where um, literally almost every account had that bar show up because there were so many duplicates in the system. And again, like a lot of this happens because of the PLG motion. Product led growth leads to a lot of this where somebody comes in and fills out a form, which creates an account record or however you have it set up. And then, like, you set that up early on, and then that same person comes back through and fills out a form again, and you don't have duplicate checks going on. And so Salesforce creates another record via the API. So that was kind of like the situation that we had run into where, I mean, in no exaggeration, we had hundreds of thousands of duplicate account records. Um, and so we asked ourselves the screen question, like, who is going to care if we actually delete these duplicate records? And the answer was nobody. In fact, everybody was going to be happy about it. But there was this kind of fear among our especially our sales executives of, hey, there might be something historically or some context on that record that doesn't exist across some of the other records. And so to address that, we just said, great, well, if we're deleting records and there's any data like an email or any conversational insights or anything on that record, we'll make sure that that all gets consolidated onto like the one master record as we go and do it. Um, I will say like that still didn't appease them a ton. Um, but we started kind of just doing a test within the RevOps function. And we started with 10,000 records and we deleted them. And we waited a week and nobody said anything. And then we deleted another 10,000 records and nobody said anything. And then probably after a month, we deleted over 100,000 account records and still nobody had said anything except for, hey, we've noticed that the duplicate account thing stopped showing up. Did you guys turn off that setting? And the answer was no. We actually just fixed the duplicate account problem. And so I think that like there's this inherent fear that people have of making change because they're scared, like especially deleting something that if you delete it, then it's gone forever. And what if in the future there was something there that we really needed to be there? And you're obviously going to make some of those mistakes in your career as a RevOps leader. You're going to delete things that eventually come back to bite you in the future that you wish that you wouldn't have done. But my experience has been that that's super rare. And the pain and suffering that you actually allow yourself to deal with day to day because of your unwillingness to simplify and delete and get rid of records or get rid of fields that people aren't using causes way more pain on an aggregate basis than any pain that you give from the one time that maybe you deleted something that ended up being needed. So, like for me, I think that's like a really big test, the scream test. Who's going to scream about it? If someone's going to scream about it, can you appease them? And if not, can you start to run some small tests in the background to say like, I'm going to maybe delete these account records and see if anybody notices. And if somebody notices, then great. Like then you figure that out. But my experience has been that most of the time people don't notice. Obviously, like when you're doing migrations of systems and other bigger things, like you can't be as maybe covert, and that becomes a little bit more where you have to go and convince and help people understand the vision. But again, I think that kind of goes back to like my philosophy on RevOps. Maybe going back to even your first question of like what surprised me about getting into RevOps is that I actually think that like you're as a RevOps leader, you probably only end up doing what you imagine a RevOps leader should do like 3% of the time. And the other like 97% of the time, you are either a sales rep therapist, you are a security guard, like making sure that nobody's adding fields into the CRM that they shouldn't be, or you're like a UN kind of negotiator, negotiating peace between marketing and finance and sales on like what is an MQL and what is a sales qualified lead and then there's like the 3% where you actually imagine. And so anyways, I think like that's also like something to keep in mind here as well is that like a lot of the role of RevOps is like those relationships and really getting back to helping people understand the why. And if you can help people understand the why, then the process and build good processes, then everything else just kind of follows.
Perfect. And I think I'm definitely going to try deleting a field unused in our system today and try to see if the scheme test actually validates that for me. So I think that
Yeah.
was a very, very interesting and cool tip that I'll definitely try out.
Yeah, and it is scary. Like I admit, like it is scary, and especially like I mean, one of the organizations that I worked with, they had 5 different fields that were labeled ARR in like various forms, and like m- all of them had different numbers in them, and so like we from a RevOps perspective did the research to figure out, okay, this is the accurate one. This is coming from the source of truth. This is connected to the source of truth. And these other ones are historic wrong ones. But even having the courage to say, like, a field as critical as ARR, we're going to delete these 4 fields. Like, it causes a lot of people to be scared because they're fearful that, well, what if one of those was the right one? And I think you really just need to help people understand that like it does more damage having 5 ARR fields where nobody knows what the truth is than to consolidate down to one field that might be wrong 1% of the time, right? Like there's so much more problems with having the duplicate fields than there is with the potential that that one field has some errors in it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it also goes back to the point you mentioned about, clearly documenting what everything in the process means, right? If there's actually no need to have 5 ARR fields when it's actually just going to be one value for a particular deal, and that doesn't make sense at all. So if you actually had a documentation that clearly said that this was the field that refers to the actual value, and as long as people know that and they get to see that it was okay, this was documented in 2024, so this should be the right field and the remaining four have to go. So I think that makes the case in itself. So yeah, I think that's a great tip, the scream test, and I'm definitely curious to uh, learn more about that and try it out. And yeah, I thought we could probably chat a little bit about the GTM Advisor Group, and would love to hear what you've been up to, and I'm sure our audience will be pretty interested to knowing as well.
Yeah, great. Yeah. I mean, honestly, so this is interesting. Post me starting the go to market advisor group, I actually went and saw this is, I promise this will connect, but I went and saw Kelly Clarkson. She's doing a Las Vegas residency right now. Um, and something that she said in her show really like resonated with me in a way that like will I hopefully it will make sense to the audience. But she's calling it her studio session, and so the entire stage was set up as if it was a recording studio. And something that she said on stage resonated with me a ton. She said, all of the different musicians that we have on stage today are what we call studio musicians. And then she described that like what a studio musician is in the music industry is kind of the best of the best. So these are the people that you bring in when you're going to record your master records. And the reason that you bring these people in is because they have done it before. They're really great at their craft, and they're just going to come in, they're going to play it right, and it's going to be right the first time. And there's not going to be a ton of iteration. And they're going to say, hey, we're going to restart this at this point, and they can just play it, right? And it's gonna be right the first time. Um, I feel like great RevOps people are like studio musicians. They make everyone else around them better without really needing the spotlight. And that's what studio musicians are. And so I think that foundation really is what kind of pushed me to start the go to market advisor group. Was this concept of, hey, like I have a ton of experience, 10 plus years in RevOps of consolidating systems, even rebuilding full quote to cash systems, things that a lot of people will do maybe once in their career. Um, and I think that there's like a little bit of this concept of how do you bring somebody like me into multiple organizations so that you can actually help those organizations kind of record their studio masters or kind of create their Salesforce instances without really having the overhead of like hiring that person. It's like the same thing. Kelly Clarkson said, we have studio artists who we pay a ton of money to come and record at our studio, but they're usually not the ones who come around and tour with us because they're really expensive, right? And so I feel like it's a similar concept in RevOps of, hey, like, how do you bring in the studio musician? So somebody who has a lot of experience in RevOps, who's probably seen your problem before, who's rebuilt quote to cash if that's what you're building, or has consolidated Microsoft Dynamics into Salesforce, has done this before, and how can you bring that person in as a one-time expense without having to have the cost of them touring with you forever, right? And so I think that's really where I wanted to start something as a consultant so that I could bring my expertise to more organizations who, especially organizations that don't have the budget to hire a senior RevOps leader like myself on an annual basis, but could probably put together a one time expense for you to build the product out for them one time. And then they can have the musicians who are still really good, right? Like, we're not saying that these are bad people, like, these
Yeah,
are good musicians that are going
yeah.
to go on tour with them and kind of keep and maintain those systems that you've helped them build. So I think that's really was my like I think that summarized really well what I was trying to accomplish with the go to market advisor group is how do you bring really experienced go to market operators to help companies who probably couldn't afford to bring them in full time, but could afford to hire them for a project and help them get things started.
Perfect. I don't know why you were hesitant to bring up that analogy, because I got it like pretty much right when you started explaining about it, right? So I think it was beautifully articulated, right? And uh, no matter how many RevOps professionals a company ends up having, it's not like any one of them is going to have experiences, for example, with consolidating tools in like a lot of different spaces, right? So if there's someone who's honed their craft really well in one particular area, and it's not like the company is going to be moving from CRMs to CRMs every year, it's just going to be a one-time thing. So it probably doesn't make sense to keep a recurring cost of just having expertise in this area, but then instead plan one-off time-bound consultation or implementation projects with experts who already done and seen it also. Yeah, I think that's a great plan, and I wish you the very best for the go-to-market advisor group.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, it's been going well so far, so hopefully it keeps going.
Awesome, awesome. Great. So coming back to the episode, one of your core philosophies is subtraction over addition, and it's especially in a world where every team wants a new tool, or process. Like it's like a shiny object syndrome. A sales leader reads about a particular tool online, and then they're like, I want to get it. I want you to help me sign this." Right. So in cases like these, how do you help GTM leaders stop adding unnecessary bloat or like more tools and processes that definitely don't have a place in the system, and what does it take to make those simplification decisions stick for the longer run?
Yeah, I mean, such a good question. And again, this goes back to my philosophy of like what it means to be a RevOps leader. This is maybe where like being the UN negotiator also comes in a little bit, is like helping people understand this. I think there's a couple of different areas here. Like one is like tool overlap, right? So a lot of times where I see this happen is that a sales rep comes in from maybe a different company or a different organization, and they were using a specific tool that they really loved there. And so they're comfortable with it and they're familiar with it. And so they want to bring that tool into this new organization. So I think everything starts from good intentions, right? Like the intention from the sales rep is not to come in and complicate things. The intention is good. And so I think really acknowledging first off that that intention is good. But then I think helping them understand and really like asking yourself, is this a tool that we already have in some other part of the business that does at least part of the function that we're bringing in? So, like for example, maybe you have a sales rep that's wanting to bring in uh, outreach for email tools, and you already have engagement, which is built into Salesforce. Um, Great. Like engagement is never going to be as good as outreach, but maybe 70, 80% of the functionality. And so, like, really sitting down to understand, okay, what is it that you loved about outreach? And is this something that we can actually solve with our current tool set? Even though it's maybe a little bit uncomfortable for you to have to learn a new tool set. Like, that is like, I think, first thing is very important, is understanding, do we already have a tool that does some or all of what you're asking this new tool to do? Um, Second, I think it's also really important for you to work with your executive team to understand, what is the true cost of this tool going to be? Because I've seen this like sales reps are really, really good in these SaaS companies of telling you that it's going to be a set it and forget it type mentality. Or they like, you go to any of their websites and the first thing that they're going to say is, man, Salesforce integration. And like in VP of sales mind, that means great. It's plug and play. I can just turn it on and it has a Salesforce integration. And like anyone on the RevOps or operations side knows that that's like not true at all. That there's like a ton of setup, there's APIs, there's different data flows. Like there's a lot of complication that comes along with bringing on any new tool. And so really helping the leadership team understand, what is the true cost of ownership going to be for this new tool. So like if you already have a roadmap for your next 3 quarters, like you probably need to now increase 5% of your maintenance time that you've planned in, because now you're adding a new tool. And then that just keeps multiplying upon itself the more tools that you actually keep adding. So really helping them understand that it's not just the cost is not just the subscription fee, but it's also a cost on RevOps to maintain it. And then I would say also, like, a third cost that a lot of people don't think about is the cognitive load that you're putting on sales reps. I would say a lot of times, like, people hear kind of one and two, and then they say, okay, it's fine. Like we just won't integrate this super well into Salesforce. And like the person, like we'll just have sales reps go in, log into outreach directly instead of having that function really well out of Salesforce. And I think again, that's a cost that people underestimate of having sales reps have to swivel chair across different systems. And it's kind of a tax on their selling time that they have because now they're having to have this cognitive load that's saying, I do this in Salesforce, but then I have to go to outreach to do this. And then if you multiply that 3 or 4 times, it's like, okay, and then I go to outreach to do this, and then I go to Gong to do this, and then I go to this to do this. And it really just becomes like sales reps are spending so much time having to think about where to even go do something instead of actually selling. So, like, I think there's like a lot more cost involved with adding a new tool than just the subscription cost itself. So, I think like that's number one, or sorry, number one, evaluating whether or not like you already have something. Number two, the real cost of that tooling. And then I would say like I really try as a philosophy to have a one tool in, one tool out rule. So, like, if we're going to bring in a new tool and you want to add a new tool or process, tell me which process or tool we're going to remove so that we can kind of stay cost neutral, both from that cognitive load and from the support load from a RevOps perspective. Um, Being in an organization that scaled from 4 to 93 reps at Thumbtack, obviously, like we brought in new technology and brought in new tools, and like the one in one out didn't work for us from a scaling perspective because your organization was growing so far. So I think maybe that's more advice for a mature organization that is a little bit more established. But if you're not in that scale, like we're really growing and changing really fast mode, I think it is a really good rule to say one in, one out. Um, and then I would say like the last thing that I would say like is really important as well is not just with the implementation, but like let's say we clear all those hurdles. I would say the number one North Star metric that you want to start looking at is adoption. So if you introduce a new tool and sales reps who promised you on everything that they were going to use this tool, and you can see that nobody's using this tool or only 10% of sales reps are using this tool, I think that like you also have to have a lot of courage to be able to go in and say, no, like we tried this. It's been 3 months, 10% of sales reps are using it, and we're pulling the plug. Like, done. We're not going to add this complication anymore. Um, and I think that's really hard for a lot of people to do because then you upset the 10% of the people who were using it. But if you can't get wide based adoption, then it's the telltale sign that this is not the right tool for you. So I would say like that is kind of generally my process over it. Um, but yeah, like I would say one of the big things that I find going into organizations is that a lot of times they're over tooled where they've been sold on specific functionality. There is low adoption. They have a handful of people who are using certain tools. And again, it gets into that kind of it's adding more chaos than it's helping. And if you like really pull back, you can save a lot of money both from subscription fees, from operational cost, and from cognitive load by just, again, getting back to those how do we simplify the process?
Got it. Makes sense. I think that's a solid framework in itself that, businesses and RevOps teams can follow before they end up adding more bloat or more tools into the system. I think that would probably help a lot of our listeners today as well. And we're almost at the end of the podcast now. And during the intro conversation that we had earlier, you mentioned that executives, often jump into AI without fixing the foundational data problem. So, in your past RevOps role as well as in your current, fractional operator slash consultant role, how do you coach teams through this reality that AI amplifies both good and bad data, and it's equally important for businesses to worry about their data first before they even start incorporating AI into the mix?
Yeah, I mean, I have a phrase that I like to use, and I think it resonates because, I mean, in the early days, especially of all the GPTs, like
Yep,
everybody talked about hallucinations, and
those
so
are already the early days, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think this phrase really hits home with people. But like, what I like to say is that AI will confidently lie to you at machine speed, like, and and that's the truth, right? Is that AI is going to lie to you, not intentionally. Like I'm not a doomsdayer who thinks that AI is cognitively thinking and trying to lie to you. Like that's not happening. What's happening is that they have a really bad data foundation, or they have a really bad semantic layer where they can't understand the data underneath that. Um, and so it ends up lying to you. And so I would say, like, yes, like I understand and like have seen it. I've been in the boardrooms, I've been in the executive meetings where you're getting a lot of pressure from boards. Like, everybody's talking about AI. You don't want to get left behind. Your competitors are adopting it. They're putting up different features, like they're kind of advertising all these different AI features. It's real. I will say a couple things. One is I actually just in my consulting just did some competitive analysis for one of my clients, and one of their big questions was we want to understand the AI adoption of some of our competitors, and so um, I pulled a bunch of information about like different news and press reports and public earning calls, what they've said about AI. Um, and on the surface, it was like, yeah, like, oh my gosh, you guys should be super worried. Like they are running full steam ahead in AI. And then I said, but hold on, look, I'm gonna go test this in their product. Like I'm gonna sign up and do kind of a ghost, uh like I'm gonna go use the product. And what I found was in every one of their competitors, they were calling AI really just kind of built-in decision trees that they built. Like these weren't actually true AI. They were masking decision trees and calling it AI on their websites and in their kind of public facing things. So I think like first and foremost, like yes, companies are thinking about AI, but I think a lot of people need to take a big deep breath and realize that like you're not as far behind as maybe the marketing of your competitor is saying that you feel like maybe you're that far behind, because the reality of what AI is doing for some of your competitors is probably very different than what they're saying it's doing for them. So I think that's like really important. Um, but second, I would say like really like the harsh reality is that AI, at least today, doesn't fix your data problems. It just scales them. And it doesn't fix your process problems. It just scales them. So if you don't have a good process, like we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, if you layer on an AI that's going to try to help in that, all it's going to do is scale that inconsistent process faster than any individual sales rep could have done that. Or if your CRM data is a mess, AI is going to confidently tell you the lie. Like if you have 5 ARR fields, like, and then you ask AI what's ARR, it's going to choose one of those, and it's a 1 in 5 chance that it's going to be right because those 4 other fields are wrong. So if you built on this like really sandy foundation, like you're not going to get the results from AI that you want. And so, like, really, the right sequence, in my opinion, is that you need to standardize. So, get everyone defining customer the same way, getting everybody following the same processes. You need to clean. So, like, you need to purge the duplicates. You need to make sure that your data's clean. And then you need to automate with AI. And, like, that's the point that you turn on AI. And I feel like, honestly, the big, maybe fallacy that I keep seeing over and over in companies that I'm talking with today is that they're starting AI on some of the more simple problems. So I've seen this now 4 or 5 times where a company takes their help center and turns that into an AI. So if somebody emails them a help center ticket, it automatically checks their help center and says, do we have an answer to this question? And if we do, then articulate that back and respond automatically. And they see really, really good results with that. And why do they see good results with that? Because again, you have a really solid data foundation and process and a semantic layer of like question answer format that an AI is just like built to handle. And so they do that first implementation, they see really good results, and then they say, awesome, let's automate some of our sales process. And then you're like, wait a minute, this is very different and not the same thing. And it's hard for an executive to understand how AI can be so good on help center and deflection, but so bad at like helping with sales. And really, again, it comes down to it's because you have that base layer of data that is supporting the AI. And if you can get to that, then yeah, like AI is going to be great for you. But 99% of organizations that I work with aren't there. And so they're turning on AI on top of chaos, and it's just automating more chaos.
Perfect. And yeah, I think this has been a recurring theme in the past few podcast episodes that we've hosted as well, right? Where it keeps coming up that when you have garbage in, you're only going to get garbage out. It's not like the output's going to magically change when you have bad data. So Yeah, I think that's a great response to how businesses are handling AI and how they should probably look at it instead of just adding a AI layer on top of everything and hoping to make things work like it's magic. So great insights again, Jordan. And so we are at the last question, and this is something that we ask our speakers before we conclude the episode. So if there is a if there are three pieces of advice that you'd like to share with our listeners who aspire to excel in the RevOps space, what would that be?
Yeah, great. It's a great question. I guess like first and foremost, I would say don't let your RevOps org fall into the trap of just being IT support for sales. I've seen this a ton where RevOps becomes a report builder or a like they just become a task taker instead of really being the strategic partner to make sure that things are done in the right way. And so I think like first and foremost, if you're in an environment where RevOps is just a ticket taker and support, like you really need to start having some conversations with the executive team of how RevOps starts to have more conversations in the strategy realm. Because if you're just getting told we've already decided to implement this or we've already decided to do this, and your job is just now to do it, like you've already set yourself up for failure. So like that to me is like first and foremost. Like RevOps is just not, is not IT support for sales. Like you have to be part of those strategic conversations and brought in really early into the processes to help avoid a ton of the data mines that we like talked about earlier in the podcast. Um, I would say second, like, and this one is probably a little bit controversial, but I would say like you really have to fight back and build for the rep and not the board. And that like sounds very counterintuitive, right? Like the board's the one who's signing checks and like they're the ones who ultimately
Yep.
probably can fire you. But the
Yep.
reality is, if the rep hates using the system or if the rep hates the process, they're not going to follow the process and they're not going to do what you've asked them to do. And then that's going to lead to the board being unhappy too, because the data that they get is going to be crap, right? Like it goes back to that whole process thing. But if you really take that framework and you are building with the rep in mind, where they're actually going to follow the process, then that's going to make everybody happy, right? Like reps happy because they have a process, they understand, they're following it, they see how it's helping them get more sales. And then that leads to good data flowing through the system, which means good reporting for the board, which means that they're happy. And so, like, it might be a little bit controversial at first, where like you're saying, like, hey, we need to make some of these changes that seemingly become rep centric, but the reality is that then flows all the way down through where everybody downstream becomes a lot more happy as well. And then like last, like I think really like I call it embracing the this is and it's a little bit it's maybe there's a couple of dimensions to this, but I call it like in RevOps you really need to be okay with embracing the unhappy path. And
Okay.
and
Okay.
what I mean by that is a couple of things. Like one is in RevOps, you have to be okay that you're probably not going to be the most popular person across the organization, right? Like you again are like the person who's having to settle some of these really complicated disputes around like what is an SQL, what is an MQL, like who's getting credit for this? Is it marketing or is it sales? Like, and there's lots of those different things that are high emotion that you have to come in and be the neutral partner to solve the problem. And I guess I'm a big maybe philosophy of like if everybody leaves the room a little bit unhappy, then you probably got to the right solution. But that means that all of your cross functional partners left the room a little bit unhappy. And so you have to be able to embrace that unhappiness. And like, second, I think I'll go back to my example with like Kelly Clarkson of like these musicians, right? Like the studio musicians. These are incredible artists. And like most of the time, like I don't know any of their names. Do you, like, but if I said Kelly Clarkson, you know who that is, right? And so a lot of time RevOps is in the shadows, um, and doing things that like are not going to get recognized on the wall, right? Like you're going to get a lot of celebration from sales hitting their number, and you're going to have a RevOps team behind them that doesn't get any of the kind of public accolades that the sales rep gets for hitting that number, even though RevOps was an integral part of that. Or you're going to like have lots of those moments where you feel like, wow, like I'm the one who actually built this system that like enabled this thing to happen. And we're celebrating the thing that like the we're just celebrating the last touch person who actually did it. And you just need to be okay with that, right? Like, and as a RevOps leader, especially, I think your job is to help be that person that then comes back to your team and have those honest conversations to be like, hey, like, no, like we know like you guys did great. And then also making sure that you're going back to your executive team to make sure that they're like, maybe you're not the one on stage getting the accolades, but like on the back end, they're coming back around. And even something as simple as a Slack message being like, hey, like I know that you guys put a ton of work into this too. Great job. Like those are the moments that I think really matter. But I would say, like, if you're in taking on a career in RevOps, you kind of have to just be able to embrace, again, that unhappiness, right? Where you're probably going to always be in the shadows and always being the negotiator that's making people unhappy. Um, and it's kind of it's a tough career. Like it's a tough place to be in, and not one that like is like leads to a ton of just like celebration and happiness. So you have to be okay with that.
Perfect. Perfect. And that brings us to the end of this insightful episode of Go to Masters. Big thanks to you, Jordan, for sharing your experiences and valuable insights. Remember, folks, you can tune in every week to learn more from game changers driving hypergrowth companies across the globe. Go to Masters is brought to you by Everstage, your trusted partner for transforming the way businesses handle sales compensation, quoting, sales planning, and so on. So, yeah, I'm your host, Anirudh, signing off. Thank you.